Welcome to the 10th edition of Healthcare Insights powered by RedMed Health Systems. Welcome all participants across the globe and lots of you from Chennai and Bangalore too. And this is hosted by LBN Tech Solutions, RedMed Health Systems, and All Ladies League Digital Transformation Chapter. I am Meghalai Sandal Kumar, and I am from LBN Tech, which is a digital marketing company, and I am the host for this evening. Today's topic is breast cancer awareness, a very important topic, a serious topic. And for today, I am so happy to welcome Dr. Selvi Radhakrishna to this webinar. A little bit about her. Dr. Selvi Radhakrishna is a leading consultant oncoplastic surgeon of Chennai, practicing at Chennai Breast Center. Understanding the need for a specialist breast service in India, especially by a lady surgeon, she undertook further training in breast cancer surgery at Adayar Cancer Institute and in the UK at Hull and Edinburgh breast units. She returned back to Chennai in 2007 to set up a state-of-the-art breast cancer center in Chennai called Chennai Breast Center. She's also the co-founder of Pen Nalam, a non-profit organization for women's health, and runs a trust called Sharana for breast cancer relief and research. We are so happy to have you here, Dr. Selvi, and welcome to this webinar.
Thank you.
Moderating this session is Ms. Vidya Muralidharan. She's from All Ladies League, and she's an OD consultant, ICF certified life and executive coach. Vidya is a breast cancer survivor. She was diagnosed in 2016, and since then, keeping with her area of passion, Vidya focuses on OD work, leadership effectiveness journeys, motivational sessions, life coaching, executive coaching, and career transition coaching. On the life coaching side, she has launched an online course, Victim to Warrior Mindset, targeted at midlife, mid-career women, and people recovering from health and other setbacks. Welcome to the webinar, Vidya. We are so happy to have you moderate this session.
Thank you, Meghu, for that wonderful introduction. It's truly a pleasure for me to be here today for several reasons. One is supporting Sandhya and Jay in this wonderful initiative wherein they're bringing in key health insights, which I think is so critical given our lifestyles of today. And it's great that Meghu, you're supporting them through hosting this on your platform. And my pleasure is I must say, tripled by being able to share this forum with Dr. Selvi. I have been the fortunate beneficiary of her treatment. I mean, I think the early diagnosis and the treatment are entirely due to her expertise, and it's also the humane approach that she brings apart from her expertise as a doctor. So it's really wonderful to be here. Thank you.
Happy to have you here, Vidya. And the RedMed Health Systems has been giving us excellent speakers. Last Saturday of every month, we have been having these healthcare insights, and Jay and Sandhya have been bringing in experts from all over departments, and different kinds of speakers have graced this webinar. And Dr. Selvi, when I sent this message out, lots of people seem to know you, and they said, wonderful speaker, wonderful doctor. So they all said that we will come. So I think as and when it progresses, more people should come in. And Vidya, while you're moderating the session, participants can put their questions up in the chat box. After the session is over, we will handle all the questions, and Dr. Selvi will answer the questions one by one. So over to you, Vidya. The floor is all yours.
Thank you. So since we talked about lifestyle, Doctor, I would like to ask you to give us a little input on what really is this cancer in general and breast cancer in particular. Is it related in any way to our lifestyles?
So thank you, Vidya. So Vidya, what we essentially mean by this word cancer is, in the entire body, different organ systems, a fundamental unit of every organ system is the cell. And the cell has reproductive capacity, isn't it? There is a DNA built in, and this DNA has to replicate itself to form new cells. And that is how we, from a single cell to an embryo to the adult that we are now, the cells have to keep replicating and to do its given job for us to be what we are today. So in this process of replication is called mitosis, and we would have all learned in biology. So the reproductive replication is called meiosis, and the rest of the body it's called mitosis. So then there is something called a cell cycle. So each cell has its own kind of, like a birth cycle, birth and death cycle. The cell has a birth and so when the cell is formed, the cell actually goes through its function and then replicates. And then the old degenerate or bad cells, or the cells that have gone bad, they are removed from that cycle. So this is naturally happening in the body every day, every minute of the day in our body in some way or the other. Sometimes there are some changes that happen in a cell. The body is not able to either recognize that it's a defective cell, or the body is not able to repair that cell, and the cell continues its journey into the cell cycle and replicates in that mistaken form. So then the function of that cell goes haywire, then the subsequent replication capacity of that cell goes haywire. So this purposeless proliferation of cells is called cancer. So it's not meant to do what it does. It just purposelessly proliferates. And anything that grows without a reason obviously becomes troublesome at some point in time. So that is what we generally mean by cancer. In the breast, the changes, 90% of the time, the changes happen in the milk ducts. So the milk is produced by cells in the glands in the breast. So from that glandular area where it's produced, that milk, the fluid is actually taken through small tubules to slightly larger tubules to slightly larger tubules, like the branches of the tree. If you look at that little last where the leaf is, from that branch to the big trunk that we have. So similarly, we have some 8 to 15 ducts that actually open up into the nipple areola, that finally into the nipple. So these ducts are lined by cells, and these cells are the ones that transform. And as long as it stays within the duct, we call it stage 0 in situ carcinoma. The minute it breaches that duct lining or the cover and comes out, then it means it has access to blood and lymphatic circulation. And that means anything good or bad to grow will need blood supply. So the cancer cells also need blood supply to grow. It needs its glucose, it needs its oxygen. So blood comes in to feed it. Blood also leaves into circulation. Through that, some of the cells may get detached and go into circulation. It goes and lodges in some part of the body. So because breast itself its only job is to feed the baby. Otherwise, it has no life-sustaining activity like the lungs or liver or brain. But when these cells go into circulation and go and lodge into some vital organs like liver, lung, or brain, or sometimes in the bone, which gives, so that there, when it proliferates and goes out of control, then there is organ damage and cause of death. So which is why we want to deal with it before it has access to circulation, or access it early and then give all the treatments that prevents it from lodging and multiplying in other parts of the body. So this is the aim of the treatment, and this is what it essentially means.
To what extent is it linked to aspects of lifestyle, or early menopause, early menstruation, or menopause, or any of these aspects?
So if you take breast cancer, so let me put it in proportion. So if you take 100 breast cancers, about 25% of them are related to what we call as reproductive risk factors. So this reproductive risk factors is centered around our ovarian function, the hormone estrogen. So that it's related to the age at menarche, when we attain puberty, the age at menopause, so and then age at first childbirth, whether breastfed or not, and so all these factors. So if you look at it, the longer the period of menstruation, reproductive cycle. So early menarche, late menopause, meaning the number of menstrual cycles are more in that reproductive life cycle of that woman. So that actually may add the risk. So all these risk factors need not necessarily mean that they will lead to breast cancer. It only means that there is slightly higher risk. So it doesn't mean that, I don't want people to think that, oh, I had an early menarche, so I'll get breast cancer. Oh, I didn't feed my baby, I'll get breast cancer. Oh, I didn't have a child, I'll get breast cancer. So that is not the case. All these factors mean it doesn't mean that they will definitely get breast cancer. It only means that compared to another person who does not have this risk factor, the people with these risk factors have a slightly higher risk. So which means, you just be more careful in getting checked up. That's all it means. It doesn't mean that they'll definitely get. That's another thing we have to highlight. So it essentially, people who've not had a pregnancy, people who've not breastfed. So breastfeeding, if you've noticed, if you breastfeed after the delivery for 4-5 months, you'll not get periods. Periods will be delayed. But if you don't breastfeed, the next month after delivery itself, you'll start getting the period. So getting the number of cycles, number of periods is seen as a risk factor. So late menopause also means you get more periods, more number of cycles. Early menarche also means more number of cycles. No pregnancy also means more number of cycles, because pregnancy at 10 months you don't have cycles. No breastfeeding also 5 months you have some protection, that also. So all this is related to the number of cycles. So in a way, if you see one generation before, if you ask your mother or your grandmother, the age at menarche will be much later. It'll be 15, 16 years, sometimes 14, 15, 16. But this generation, the menarche comes off early. I've seen like 9-year-olds and 10-year-olds are starting their period. I don't know whether it's, today's diet or the milk or, what is the reason. We're still not able to pinpoint, but this seems to be across the board, not particularly any one community. It's across the board, all, particularly the more affluent society, the more the risk of getting periods early. And then menopause also. If you ask your grandmother, she would have had her menopause by mid-40s or at least late 40s. Now it's extending well beyond their 50s. It's very, very common to see people menstruating until 52, 53, 54, 55 also. So all this leads slightly to the risk. And also earlier, if you see, the pregnancy number of children were more. Now we are, the family size is constricted. We're all career women, we're not able to stay at home and breastfeed. So we off to work. At least thankfully now the maternity leave is up to 6 months. But earlier it was like 3 months and people had to go to work immediately. So all these factors all these factors account to about 25%. But so another 5 to 10% is related to genetic factors. So genetic factors, what I mean by genetic factors is, sometimes there are DNA repair genes that become defective, and this is carried on from mother to daughter, from father to daughter. So it can come from both mother and father. And these defective genes can actually increase the risk of breast and ovarian cancer. Now, this accounts to only about 5 to, if you take 100 breast cancers, only 5 to 10 will be related to these genes. And people who've inherited these genes in their family, if you go back and trace their family history, there'll be multiple members, not just one member, but multiple members with breast or ovarian cancer or other related cancers. So it's sometimes, very, very rarely, we can have somebody starting off that mutation without any pre-existing family history. So these are possible in about 5 to 10% of people. So the vast majority of it we still don't know, but this lifestyle contributes to breast cancer in the way that the lifestyle contributes to all these reproductive changes, that not having children, not breastfeeding, early menarche, late menarche, all this is something related to the nutrition and lack of exercise. And if you see, childhood obesity is very, very common. and that is probably the reason why children are menstruating early. And similarly, obesity, this truncal obesity is very common in menopausal women, and there's not stopping periods in the late 40s and early 50s, and they're menstruating well beyond into their menopause. So all these could be the lifestyle associated. So nutrition and lifestyle indirectly contributes to the reproductive risk factors. So this is how I would link the lifestyle.
Okay. So, Doctor, we thank you for that fairly elaborate explanation for women, their cycles, and how this whole thing, the onset, is impacted by so many factors. But we do also hear about men having breast cancer. So I guess the incidence is relatively less, but what could be the causes?
So 1%, if you have 100 female breast cancers, 100 to 1. So only one male breast cancer. So if I see 300 breast cancers a year, I would see probably 2 or 3 men with breast cancer. The male breast cancer is almost always genetic. There is some genetic. So if we see a male breast cancer, we go back into history, check all the other women in the family. It's usually some genetic issue will be there, and like other reasons, like there's no reproductive risk factor for men, but what we still don't know is about 60%. So the donor factor applies to them also.
So in terms of diagnosis, what is the earliest age at which one would be recommended to start doing screening?
So I recommend women to self-check. So from puberty, a mother should teach the daughter, just like they teach about menstrual hygiene. One should be aware of not being paranoid. I don't think we should, you keep using this word, check for cancer, check for this, check for that. Then it kind of becomes paranoia, and also it's unhealthy to be obsessed about something like that. So it's just like how there should be how we teach them hygiene. Just tell them that every monthly once, after every cycle, just feel your breast when you have your shower. The idea is not go and look for trouble. That's very important. I always tell even adult women, I say, don't go and look for trouble, because that is my job. So if you look for trouble, you will find some trouble, because human mind is like that. You see what you want to see. So idea is to know what is normal, what the breast feels like, and what the breast looks like. So this is what is important. So this kind of familiarity helps in knowing what is normal. So the breast is not a very static organ. It's a very dynamic organ. It changes with every menstrual cycle. It changes with age. It changes with pregnancy. It changes with breastfeeding. So you know what is normal. You know what is the change that you feel with your breasts regularly. So when you know this, if there is any abnormality, obviously you will perceive it, because it's very unfortunate that people come with lemon-sized or orange-sized, apple-sized breast masses. And because breast is not it's something that you can feel. It's not like a stomach or a liver or pancreas or a kidney that you can't feel, or a lung. It is inside a cavity, all wrapped up. But here, this is a surface organ. This is something we touch every day to bathe, and some this awareness about how you feel and how one looks is very, very important, and is something that can be easily practiced. So this is breast self-examination. So outside of breast self-examination, I would recommend mammographic screening from age 40 onwards in our country, at least once in 2 years. And then if a woman is known to have a mutation in her family, a mutation carrier in the family, then maybe screening should start earlier.
So you talked about identifying abnormalities. Could you elaborate that a little bit? What might be classified as an abnormality?
I don't think we should talk about abnormalities at all, because in a general forum, people should know what is normal.
Okay.
And anything that is disturbing them, which is not normal to them, check one more month. If it's still persistent, bring it to the, because if I say look for lump, look for this, look for that, the next cycle they go and examine themselves, everything will seem like a lump. So we have to, doctors have the responsibility of not spreading
Fear.
fear.
I think what Dr. Selvi said was right. Look for lumps. People will get paranoid and they feel that there are lumps. Yeah, maybe it's true. Should not spread the fear.
Yeah, it's true. It's a fine balance, I guess.
Yeah.
So actually that, because, quite often in a lot of websites, you get information about, look for lumps, look for skin thickening, look for nipple discharge, look for asymmetry, look for a lot of signs are there, 7 signs, 10 signs. That actually often I've seen that, whenever I give a talk like this in a public forum, and people listen to it, and the next day they have a shower or check themselves, and invariably there'll be something that's bothering them, and there'll be a panic. So it's very important. That's why we say touch, look, and check. And there is a big slogan with breastcancer.org, show some TLC to your breast. So again, check means know what is normal. If you know what is normal, abnormal is always going to be easily perceptible. And then you can check again. I actually tell them check 1 more month later, and if it's still persistent, that you have that doubt, it looks slightly different, or this is vague and it's not my normal self, then come and show it to us.
So, doctor, are there situations where it's completely asymptomatic, where you don't have any of these changes, but you still end up diagnosing?
So that is what we pick up in screening. So people have health checks, and in the West, they have an organized screening program in many countries. So they do, without any symptoms, women proactively go and get mammograms done. And when you do mammograms, they pick up findings, which when we evaluate, we find that it is a cancer, but before it becomes symptomatic. So these are called screen detected cancers. The outcomes of these screen detected cancers are good because they're picked up early before they have the chance to spread.
So we hear of different stages of cancer and something that's more treatable. So can you talk a little about which stage is the earliest that you can diagnose?
So stage 0, stage 1, stage 2 are still considered early cancers. And stage 3 is slightly larger cancers with possible spread to the lymph nodes and all that. And stage 4 is obviously beyond the breast to other parts of the body, like liver, lung. So generally stage 4 is something that we're all like upset about, because then it obviously stop difficult to cure cancers, and it is going to cause some way or the other a bad result. But stage 1 and 2 will be considered early, definitely, which means the size of the cancer is small and that it is not spread to the lymph nodes, and easily treatable.
So can there be risk induced by any other treatments that you might have been taking, like hormone therapy or any other strong medication?
Yeah, so people who have been treated for infertility and who've not had success with their infertility treatments may be slightly more at a slightly higher risk, but it doesn't mean that they will definitely get. And similarly, patients who've had earlier treatment for some other radiation to the chest for some other reason, like lymphomas in their childhood, they may be slightly more at risk. So these are people who should be screened more carefully regularly, even if they don't have symptoms.
So after one gets diagnosed, what are some do's and don'ts, if I may say so?
So basically, I see a lot of people now, there's particularly with this social media thing that's going on, a lot of bad press about treatments, allopathic treatments. So right now, with the evidence that we have, allopathic treatments are the most researched and most reported forms of treatment. I'm not, I'm a great proponent of other forms of treatment too, wherever that is applicable. But for breast cancer, I do not see a role for other forms of treatment in the way of Ayurveda or Siddha or homeopathy or whatever other streams of medicine that there are to replace allopathic medicine. I would say you can use it to complement. And so I see a lot of people, even well-educated people, I don't want chemotherapy, I don't want to undergo surgery, I'll try Ayurveda, I'll try Shimoga medicine, I'll try this, I'll try that. So when and then they come back at a stage when, like, when we can't do anything. So this is very important. I've also seen this Luke Cutrino's diet or whatever. There, people pay a lot of money to go through all of that. So and then so use it as complementary treatment, no one has any problem. But you use it to replace allopathic treatment, then I often see a lot of people with advanced disease at 6 months later or 1 year later, and at that time we are not, unfortunately, the disease is too far spread for us to do anything meaningful. So that is definitely a thing. And then empower yourself with all the available information regarding treatment and possible alternative treatments in the way of, like, risks, understanding the risk versus benefit, and then positive outlook, basically. So it's like, I see a lot of people seeing treatments as IO chemotherapy, IO radiotherapy, IO mastic. So this that kind of, you look at it with only the side effects as a result of the treatment, but that only will be predominant. You look at it like a villain all the time, then the villainous effect only will actually play in your mind. So it's like a glass that is half full or half empty. If so, in Tamil we say, no, half tumbler da irukku, half tumbler irukku. The da makes a big difference. No, is it? Do I have only half tumbler or do I have half tumbler? So that only makes that difference there. That you have half tumbler itself is half a glass of water itself is a blessing, is something that we have to, it's a vision that it's the understanding or it's the perception that. So any treatment is intended to provide relief and give a cure. So that is something which people have to understand. I give this example. Nobody likes to write exams, but we all, particularly 11th and 12th, we all sit along with the children and burn midnight oil, whatever, and endless preparation, whatever. All that hard work is toward that result, so we get a good future. Similarly, 10 months of pregnancy, if we can have a baby without the 10 months of carrying and 3 or 4 kilo baby along with the water and everything, and to undergo that pain eventually, whether it's natural delivery or cesarean, definitely it will be a pleasure. But we go through so much pain to get that bundle of joy. So similarly, the bundle of joy here is the cure, and it's that the survival outcome. And so we have to learn to look at it differently to be able to sail through the treatment. And so that is certainly, that attitude makes a big difference. And yes, there are side effects, yes, there is difficulty, but I think, the way we look at it makes a difference.
Talking about attitude, and Doctor, how much does, I do know mind does make an impact on everything, but to what extent does mind actually impact even the onset of cancer as well as getting healed as a result of the treatment?
So in a way, I've seen a lot of people, you go back and question them about in a lot of women, when you talk to them when they're newly diagnosed, most of them would have had a major stress within the previous 2 to 5 years in their life. And majority of them, in fact, I often keep thinking about objectifying that information and actually writing it up, but I never got around doing it. So somewhere, like, physical mental stress contributes to the way body repairs itself, And then the, like I said, the repairing mechanisms is what actually leads to all these cellular changes, and there are some that we have control over, some that we don't have control over. So and that is why it's very difficult in this modern day world, particularly with all these situations that are panning out. It's very easy to say don't be stressed, and sometimes hearing that don't be stressed itself will become a stress. so so it's all something that we have to live through all these things. But yes, there is some association, although I can't pin it to a cause.
Coming to another very practical and important dimension relating to treatment, Dr. B, what kind of financial support, because these treatments are expensive, what kind of financial support is available to people who do not have access to medical insurance and things like that?
Unfortunately, there is a lot of all these state governments and the central government with all these Ayushman Bharat, Arogya Shri, Chief Minister scheme. All different states have different whatever, but it just covers a very basic um, level of treatment. And though government hospitals, it's of course free. Other places you just have to play a bare minimum with all these schemes, Ayushman Bharat and all. But the thing is, say like for example, if you use a chemotherapeutic agent, Adriamycin, for example, I'm just giving it. So this Adriamycin drug cost itself could be just 600 rupees or 500 rupees. But what costs more money is the pre-medication to it and the post-medication and administering it safely. Because there are some other adverse effects that can happen. So all these things are not, whoever made the cost projection for the government didn't account for all these things. And they just cover the basic drug cost, which I feel is not a is disservice to people, because you give Adriamycin under the scheme and then send them home, they're just going to vomit, have 2-3 days of vomiting, which is actually very poor quality of life. The antiemetic drugs that we use for chemotherapy is much more expensive than the chemotherapeutic drug. So these are all the things that has to be factored in when you plan thing. We have a word for this: financial toxicity. In addition to toxicity that happens with the side effects due to the drug, the cost of it actually becomes another toxic factor. So unfortunately, apart from insurance and the public, hospitals, this is a major problem in our country. So the disparities in the healthcare, both from the provider setup side and from the patient side in terms of affordability, actually is huge.
Another aspect which, in fact, I can also talk about my own personal experience after you've been through it. There doesn't seem to be much scope for insurance. So is there any kind of scheme that can be extended? And why is it in the first place that cancer survivors are not considered for any kind of health insurance? I think that's again only in India.
I think some policies now, some companies accept after 5 years. So they give a window period of 5 years and they say after 5 years, then we'll cover you again. So this is again, it's because insurance is also another business industry and they want to protect their interests, and you cannot risk stratify people as to who will give trouble and who will not. And which is why they treat it that, see, when education becomes business, when health becomes business, then people suffer. End of the day, people suffer. When we become patients, we understand. But in a equitable country, health and education should not be business; should be service. But unfortunately, the way it is in our country, both are business. So it is provided by the government as service, but that is very poorly done. So the businesses are obviously replacing that. So, and because it's a business, it's a business. So unfortunate, but that is a reality, and it's, I don't see a change happening in the next decade or so, and unless it's very difficult in most parts of the world. It's still only in countries like UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, where health is still a state subject, and it's state funded, and there are private practices, but where it is state funded and state in charge, there are a lot of delays, and there are a lot of issues for them also. So it's not it's not optimal in many places, not only in our country, in many places. And unfortunately, because of the sheer numbers in our country, population, we see it more, it is more stark for us to see.
So after somebody has gone through the treatment and has come through maybe well and so on, what is it that you would recommend in terms of lifestyle? Or do they have to make some changes? Do they can they go back to whatever they were doing earlier and so on?
So two things happen. One, at an emotional level, something, you come to the brink of, that word itself, puts you, gives that fear, and then you think like, all is, finished, and then you go through all that phase of being there and then recovering from it. So people take it both ways. There are people who take it as, okay, this is another leash of life that I've been given, and now I should do what I want to do. I should do what is meaningful for me to do, and I should take care of myself in order to do all these things, and then look after whatever else that is left of my responsibility. So there, then they become, they take things in their hand, become in charge, and then like lifestyle changes in terms of pick up a hobby, do something that is more passionate to you, more meaningful to you, rather than mundane job whatever. And then take care of your health in terms of eat healthy, exercise regularly, and go out, reach out to others. You find joy in things that you want to do, and do things that bring more meaning and joy into your life. So that is one group of people. There are others who become depressed because of what they've been through, and then wallow in it. And these are the very most difficult people. They gain weight, they hardly move out, and disfiguring surgery makes it even more difficult for them to step out in social life. And it just goes, it's actually a vicious cycle. So two groups of people we see. And the only thing is that sometimes for the first few years you'll be careful, and then again go back into the old ways. So there's a third group. So somewhere we have to keep reminding, to live healthy, to find more meaning to whatever you do. And there's somewhere, so that's the thing. So to recover from the toxicities of treatment itself will take 6 months to a year. And many get back to, I would say, at least a good 80-90% of people will get back to normal levels of activity. And in fact, they will do more than what they ever did before. And I have seen a lot of marathon runners, cycling, swimming, taking up new sports, art, excelling in this, writing books, traveling. All this also I've seen. I've also seen the other extreme. But the recovering from all the treatments will probably take about 6 months to a year. And after that, you're like everybody else. And I think it should do the former rather than the latter.
Yeah, I think I fall into that former category.
Yeah.
That's why I was nodding. I could relate to that. So, in terms of the treatment per se, doctor, which is really the most difficult part? And can you talk a little about at least the ones that I know in symptoms you said I don't want to talk about it. So, not to induce fear, but what are some of the typical after effects or side effects, and how does one deal with it?
In treatments, we group it into 2 or 3 ways. One is to deal with it locally. So it is growing in the breast. So it's growing in the breast, and it has to grow there for it to spread out in other places. So dealing with that there locally is called local treatment, which is surgery, physically removing it from there. So that is surgery. And surgery can be done in 2 ways. We can preserve the breast, we can remove the breast in entirety, we can check the lymph nodes or remove the nodes in entirety. So that is surgery. And then after surgery, reducing the risk of it coming back in that place locally in the same place where we operated. We call that radiotherapy. So these two treatments are local treatments. And then the systemic treatments, assuming for the tumor to have grown to that size, whatever size it's grown, it may have already thrown some cells into circulation, and we don't see any spread now, but these cells can remain silent, and then when an environment is conducive for it, it can grow, and it can start growing, may grow many years later also. So in order to reduce that risk, we cannot eliminate that risk altogether, but we can definitely reduce that risk. So in order to reduce that risk, we use treatments like chemotherapy, hormone therapy, and targeted treatments. So these treatments are used. So this chemotherapy means it's cytotoxic. So what it means is it's toxic to the bad cells. So unfortunately, the treatments, chemotherapy drugs that we have, we do not have drugs that are selectively toxic to cancer cells. It's generally toxic to all cells. So the toxicity that is produced is not selective. It applies to all cells, and that is why you have side effects like hair fall, like vomiting, diarrhea, immune suppression, and all that. So with generally, the normal cells have the capacity to recover and come back to normalcy, whereas abnormal cells, like the cancer cells, they're already abnormal. So when you hit them hard, they do not recover, and subsequently you keep hitting them again with more and more chemotherapy with every cycle. Then these cells don't replicate and they die down. So that is a principle in giving multiple cycles of chemotherapy. And we give that time, 3 weeks or 2 weeks gap between the two cycles, is only for the time that is enough for the normal cells to recover, and normal cells to recover, and not long enough so that the cancer cells recover. So that is the importance in timing that cycle. And then the hormone therapy is given over a long period of time, 5 years and 10 years. This is applicable only for hormone sensitive breast cancers. It's not applicable for all cancers. So only for hormone sensitive breast cancers. And then we have other treatments called targeted treatments. Sometimes there are, we have things called, HER2 positive breast cancer. It's a epidermal growth factor receptor that is expressed in breast cancer tumors. It's not there in all tumors, only about a third of breast cancers. So if it is expressed, then we can selectively target that HER2 receptor, and that also actually gives the good outcome, because this is the one that switches on the ignition for the cells to drive and grow. So if you block that, then it doesn't divide and grow. So that is a principle. So all these treatments, wherever applicable, is designed in such a way that it will reduce the load of tumor cells that may have escaped the main tumor and gone into circulation. So those are the treatments that are available. So they all have their own, toxicities in various ways and forms. Most are manageable, and most are temporary. And the important thing is to be consistent with it and complete it. So where one is not able to tolerate, then we obviously look for alternative ways of managing it.
Coming to the caregiver or the family, what is it that, because I also find that the family often doesn't know what to do, how to deal with it, because they also don't understand what exactly is happening to the person. So what are some things that they should focus on in terms of enabling this whole process of recovery?
So the thing is, when the new diagnosis happens, everybody rallies along. The anxiety is shared by everybody. The extended family also gets involved. Everybody is there initially when all these things happen, and there's a lot of support. Sometimes too much support that actually disturbs you. But what happens over a period of time? See, this is a prolonged treatment, and not only prolonged treatment, it's a prolonged recovery also. I think what happens in the immediate family is people, get weary. You are going through it, but the children, husband, your in-laws, your mother, father, and they rally around. Definitely all of them do their bit. But over a period of time, Just like, the person who undergoes the treatment also gets weary and tired with all the treatments. They also actually, like, and then an added responsibility of this arranging finance and all that. So it is, it becomes weary and deary for all of them. So, and then the support goes down, and the support goes down, then patient suffers. And then there is a lot of emotional issues. Oh, they don't understand what I go through, or, I'm not getting what is due. All this, lot of mental trauma happens. Families get separated. Lot of, there are instances where the families become stronger and the bonding becomes stronger, but this also happens. So, which is why it's important to point out that yes, this is a long treatment, and everybody's mental health is important, everybody's physical health is important, and give give that space, for accommodate everybody's um, whatever changes that are happening.
Right.
And these days there are a lot of resource people available to counsel. There is online blogs, there are groups, and the local support groups. People like you can reach out to them both professionally and personally.
Yeah.
So we just need to connect with other people to see where we can get help.
From your side, Doctor, I know I have attended a couple of your workshops. So what are the kind of support groups that are there, especially in cities of Chennai, Bangalore, because we have quite a few people on this call.
Yeah. So what we do is, there is a very well-trained volunteer group who have been patients themselves, and who know. I've trained them personally. There are things that they should say, and there are things that they should not say and influence. So they have been taught and trained, and so they reach out to people who need help. So we give the numbers, we connect them, and then there is a WhatsApp group. Unfortunately, it has some limitations, but we try and manage as best as we can. And then we have our monthly support group meetings, where on popular demand we bring up topics and issues that, and sometimes it has to be repetitive, and we keep doing that. And then unfortunately, we're a little too busy as a unit to individually follow up every single thing, but we do our best, where we have a good team of nurses. And we have been constrained a bit because of all this pandemic, number of staffing issues and all that. But generally, I think our girls have been reasonably good with patients, and wherever I can, I definitely pitch in as well.
Okay. I think I'll just ask you one last question, and then let the audience have their questions. At what point, it is a long drawn out process, you said. So after how many years can one kind of be sure that there will be no recurrence or relapse, or is there never a point when you can say that?
So I would say it's like if you're a woman, you can never say that the risk is your lifetime to get the breast cancer. So no one is immune from it. Similarly, somebody who's had it, it's not like you can say you'll never give. There's some other problem that can crop up. It's like you sit in a car and go. You cannot say that this car will not get delayed, this car will not break down, this car will not meet with an accident. You sit in that car and go with the hope and confidence that you will reach wherever you want to reach. And the responsibility of the owner of the car and the driver is to make sure that he drives safely, that follows all the road rules, car is in good condition, you have enough fuel, and you know the road conditions ahead. And so these are all known factors that we can control. So there is an unknown factor that no one knows. So there is an unknown factor with every woman, not just survivors. Okay. For that survivors, there is that extra one more factor. That's all. So I would not call it recurrence. I will not call it like thing, and because that puts a fear of recurrence, and everyday quality of life becomes difficult. So what we should aim at, all the known factors, all the factors that I have some influence or control over, I will exercise it. And what is unknown. Just let us leave it be. So that is what I think. That is how we should take it.
Thank you very much, Doctor. That was your typical, very down to earth, practical style of responding to questions. I see a lot of questions from the audience. I think Meghu has been collating them. So I'll hand this over to Meghu for calling out the questions.
Yeah. Yeah, participants, if you have any questions, you can start typing them in the chat box and we can call them out one by one. That was a wonderful, very, very clear, crystal clear explanation, Dr. Selvi. I am sure lots of people have been listening to you and they will benefit through the YouTube video also. The recording will be uploaded on YouTube, so lots of people also will be watching. You can bring the spotlight on for Vidya also, Venkat, so that she's also there. So one question from Usha Sridhar, I can see. Dr. Selvi, very clear explanation and absolutely relevant information. What about preventive mastectomy if a person carries the genetic mutation? Has this study been done in India?
Yeah, we do. If there is a known mutation carrier, like what Angelina Jolie had,
Yes.
so it's a good strategy to do a risk reducing mastectomy. And these days we combine it with reconstruction also. So that could be life-saving.
Okay. So it is possible.
Yes.
Do it. Yes. Okay.
Yes.
So for that, what kind of test? I mean, the family history has to be known for that, right?
I think there is an elaborate process for it. So there is a pre-test counseling, there is a test, there is a post-test counseling. So we go through several sessions. We put them through a psychologist's appraisal, and there are many levels of counseling done before we actually go ahead. And then there are options of reconstruction, and then advice regarding follow-up after that. So all of this happens before one embarks into it. It may take even up to 6 months to a year for us to decide which way we're going to progress. So yes, there is a process to it.
Okay. There is one question from a gentleman here who is a regular. You were talking about male breast cancer, although the percentage is very less. He's asking whether any checkup is recommended for gentlemen.
Not regularly, no. So if there is trouble, obviously you should reach out. But so again, like I said, see, breast is an external surface organ. Everybody, men or women, like the back of your hand, you should know the breast.
Yeah.
And there is no excuse for not knowing.
Yeah, no excuse for not knowing. Okay. One more question from the same person. One is treated, and will the second one is also at risk? He's asking about one breast, if it is treated.
So yes, so that is why we do annual mammograms for people who are treated for breast cancer. There is a potential risk, and that is why we check regularly. And the risk is something like 7%, approximately 7%. In a mutation carrier, it will be much higher. But otherwise, it's about 5 to 7%, and it doesn't warrant a double mastectomy just because one is likely to get. But we do keep a close eye.
Okay. Angela, welcome. Nice to see you here. Nicely covered all aspects, doctor. She says nowadays youngsters are having higher level of stress. What is your advice for that?
Not only youngsters, all of us. I think the pandemic around, and the economic downturn, everything is a stress. Again, it's perception, isn't it? There are any stress. Look at it this way: factors that are within your control, factors that are out of your control. The factors that you're in control, checklist 1, 2, 3, 4. What can I do immediately? What can I do later? What can I? So it's actually just that approach and attitude is what actually causes or relieves stress. So I think one has to be, having said all this, I could be stressed now about something. It's human. It's human to get stressed, but somebody who has that calm and leisure in their mind. It's not the time. It's not the, it's somewhere there. When you'll able to, you will be able to see that stress, and then you'll also work at a solution to relieve that stress. So that just requires you have to experience life for us to be able to get there. I think.
Yeah.
Eventually we'll get there.
So each of you must, I suppose there is a stress buster for everybody, their
Yeah.
favorite stress buster. So you will have to follow that and sort of bring it down. And
Yeah.
I suppose we must have some me time, right? So everybody should have some me time, some relaxing time that will, give a stress-free life.
Yeah.
And there's one question from Sandhya Rao. How reliable are non-invasive radiation-free AI solutions for detecting early stage breast cancer? How reliable?
It's all work in progress. I think someday, or maybe another few years or a decade, we'll have some solution to it. Yeah,
Okay.
it's all work in progress.
Okay. So it is work in progress. So we're taking baby steps towards that.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
someday it will be much more advanced. Okay.
Yes.
So anybody wants to ask any question, you can unmute and ask. What about one common question which some people in the internet also I saw, do tight clothes, wearing tight clothes, do they have any impact on
Not
getting
to
cancer?
cause,
Yeah.
no, not to cause breast cancer.
Yeah.
Tight or loose is there each one's comfort.
Okay.
Not really causative.
Okay.
I wanted to find out what about the effects of cosmetics? Do they cause these cancers?
So
Or
there
even
are
coloring
some
agents?
parabens and all these things are shown to increase, the risk of slightly increase. There's a lot of work done, and there is some association with other cancers, including breast cancers.
Mhm.
So that is why people are now going back to, paraben free this, paraben free that, even the bottles, PET bottles and all that. So we don't know. I mean, all of, it wasn't seen so much earlier and it's seen now. Then we have to find out what has changed now to increase. And then people are finding a lot of associations. So
Is it proven?
no, I don't think there is see, these things cannot be proven. They can only associate.
Okay. Yeah. So when we say it is seen a lot more now, is it because people come out and talk about it, and that is why it is known?
Actually, that also could be a reason, but I think there is truly an increase in number. I think we are seeing more women with breast cancers. There is an increase in the number. I think it's increasing life expectancy. So women are living longer. If you live long enough, you will develop some changes which can lead to cancer. And lifestyle is changed, and like you said, stress factors. Everything is different now, isn't it, from our grandparents' time?
Right. So have you noticed that the profile of women who actually get breast cancer are more in the higher age group?
Yeah,
is it older women?
Older age group and higher affluent women.
Oh.
Okay.
So this breast cancer, there's a stark difference between breast and cervical cancer. This is again generalized. It's not specific. This is kind of, it's not a very specific thing. But cervical cancer is more in the lower socioeconomic strata, and breast cancer is more in the higher socioeconomic strata, in the industrialized world particularly.
Why is that?
It's again lifestyle, because more affluence, more lifestyle related issues.
Okay. That explains it.
But why would then that not be seen in the cervical cancer?
Cervical cancer is usually because of a virus, HPV, human papilloma virus. And human papilloma virus accounts for about 70% of cervical cancer. And so this again, lack of screening and all that in the lower socioeconomic strata.
Okay. Thank you. Meghu, I think there are a couple more questions.
Yeah. Nitya Murali, nice of you to come to this webinar. Happy to see you here. You want to ask this question yourself? Okay. I think her question is for non-high risk group. How often can mammogram be done safely? You said every 2 years.
Once in 2 years. Once in 2 years.
Okay. Exercise, can it prevent cancer?
So,
regular
yes,
exercise.
So again, it's association. Exercise means more lean muscle mass, less fat. Less fat means less estrogen. So less estrogen means less reproductive risk factors.
Okay.
So exercise not only cancer, but lot of other benefits also.
Other diseases also are kept at bay.
Not only diseases, even mood. You exercise vigorously, you're definitely, your endorphins are high, you're happier.
That
You're more
answers the
energetic.
stress question, actually.
Yes.
Good.
So exercise need not be as exercise. It can be in many other ways. Dance, swimming, many other ways that brings joy.
Yeah, correct. It does give you up. One question from Venkat Natarajan, a very different kind of question. Is there a way cancer can self-cure? Has it ever happened before?
There are known instances like some renal cancers can just disappear on their own.
Okay.
Yes, we've heard of it.
Yeah.
But no one, once you make a diagnosis, no one waits for it to self-cure. So obviously we don't have data about it. And the odd anecdotes that we get are not strong enough data to go by it.
Okay. So if once detected, people just make a beeline to get cured, right? I mean,
Yes.
if they don't sit and wait. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So any other questions, anybody? We have come to the end of the questions in the chat box, but if you want, you can unmute and ask. We still have a little more time left. Okay, Sandhya, you want to say something?
Yeah, I'd like to just deeply thank Dr. Selvi for agreeing to come on the webinar in spite of a busy schedule. And I'm glad the webinar happened considering the weather situation in Chennai. Megu was not sure if she could provide the services, and I was also thinking about Dr. Selvi also being from Chennai. If we could have
actually, I was concerned about this internet connection. A lot of with the erratic power supply.
That is
not too bad, but we do have another big meeting. Actually, it's ongoing now, but our session starts from 6:30, 6:25 actually, to be precise.
Okay.
That is fertility and breast cancer. So that's for another 3-hour thing. That's again today. So
yeah. So I want to thank. There's one more question. What does oncoplasty cover?
So oncoplasty means, traditionally all breast cancer surgeries were mutilating, removing the breast. So it's disfiguring and cosmetically very damaging. So what breast surgeons over a period of time, you now, by doing your treatments, you're prolonging life, but we also want to give a better quality of life, because breast is an important aspect of a woman's, self-esteem, body image and all that. And so we don't want to actually compromise on the cosmetic aspect that will actually psychologically damage a woman's, in addition to all the disease-related toxicity, this also adds to the problems. So we combined plastic techniques in order to give a reasonable looking breast after treatment for breast cancer. So it could be in the way of preserving the breast with plastic techniques that makes the breast look as near normal as possible, or even better sometimes. Or when you've had a mastectomy, reconstructing the breast so there is symmetry and there is a form that looks like a breast. And so these are techniques that these are called oncoplastic techniques. So this is a kind of a branch of surgery that is developed in the last decade or so, and it's not applicable for all for various reasons, but in many we can accommodate these techniques.
Okay. One question from Jay says, is periodic screening mandatory by governments, state and center in India?
No, I don't think
screening is not mandatory.
It's not mandatory, but government is, to be fair to them, they have this NCDS, non-communicable disease screening program, which includes not only cancer, it includes diabetes, blood pressure, and cardiovascular diseases also. So there's a lot of funding for it, and the women are trained to, ASHA workers are trained to go and do breast checks and create awareness amongst people. So a lot of proactive steps are happening, but unfortunately, the last 2 years, if we had lot of our resources got diverted for COVID, and it has set us back by 10 years in every sphere of our government's. Unfortunate that. So we have to regroup ourselves and move forward.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we can close now. So
There's one more question saying, as COVID has
yeah, COVID, any impact COVID has on cancer or breast cancer?
COVID delayed things. People afraid of COVID did not come for checkups, ignored symptoms.
Okay.
Many could not proceed with treatments, particularly early days when all of us didn't know what was happening with COVID. A lot of treatments got missed out, got delayed. Very unfortunate. But like everybody else, we're also learning to live with it.
Okay. Thank you so much, Doctor. So many things I've noted down here, and I'm sure people are taking back a lot today, especially the risk factors, which you said, no, very extensively. You told about late menopause and early menarche, no pregnancy, no breastfeeding, comparison between the current life and our previous generation lives. That also matters. And you also told about, I like that line, show some TLC to your breast. It's very nice. And
it's actually the breastcancer.org, their breakthrough breast cancer. I think that their slogan. Yeah.
Okay, that is nice, because very important for us to have this self-examination. So that
it's actually touch, look, and check.
Yeah.
Touch, look, and check is TLC.
Touch, look, and check. Okay. Tender loving care with touch, look, and check. Okay. Yeah. And you also said about stress. Stress is a very big trigger, and somebody with some big incident in their lives 3 or 4 years before they are diagnosed, such an important factor. So very important for us to keep stress at bay. More important now that you have mentioned that. And I really like that phrase which you use, financial toxicity. I've never heard that, but now that you say it, and Vidya was telling about that insurance, the cancer survivors are not allowed to renew their insurance after
renewal is possible. Okay. Renewal is possible. A new policy, they will usually, many actually deny it. But some actually give a 5-year window period. You will live beyond 5 years, then I will cover you some things. Okay. And so renewal is possible. You cannot escalate your cover. So suppose you covered for 2 lakhs and then you want 5 lakhs or you want 10 lakhs. That is not possible. That is currently like there are difficulties, obviously, because they are treating it like a business. No, they consider it as a losing thing. So it's actually unfortunate, but that is what happens now.
Is there any move there by the insurance companies that if you do periodic checks, then your premium can be reduced?
I actually honestly don't know, but they should incentivize it.
Yeah.
So I hope the stakeholders are listening, because this financial impact is just too much. Apart from the health impact, this financial impact is really too much. So some stakeholders should listen. Something has to be done by the people who matter and the lawmakers.
Yeah.
So one thing which I want to stress is, do things that give joy in your lives. That is so impactful. What you said, that is not only for cancer survivors and people who are undergoing treatment, that is for everybody. So you keep the stress at bay and don't bring other lifestyle diseases too. So I like that line which you said, Dr. Selvi, and the other things which you have just said, which is so useful. And thanks again for your valuable time. I know that you're heading to another webinar now, but you just came into Healthcare Insights and threw a lot of light on many questions people have. Thank you so much. And thank you, participants. You've been wonderful and lovely questions here too. And thank you so much for tuning in. So
thank you so much. Thank you, Meghu, for the hosting, Vidya for the moderation, and Dr. Selvi for coming on to this webinar. And LBN Tech, the team, as always supportive. Thank you.
And Vidya Muralidharan is a living example of how you should be after cancer strikes. She's achieving so much. She's so inspiring there. You can just see her at it. So she herself is a living example.
Thank you, Meghu.
Thank you, Vidya. That was wonderful moderating.
It's this kind of encouragement that keeps me going, actually.
Yeah.
Thank you. It was wonderful talking to you, Dr. Selvi. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
So
Thank
much.
you.
And the
Thank
next Saturday, December, just one quick line. It is about the diabetes, and Jay and Sandhya have brought in a specialist who will talk about diabetes. Last Saturday of December, please mark your calendars. I will send you all the information, and you can check it out also on social media. Thank you for tuning in. Have a lovely evening, all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.